Hellfire Part 5. A different sea of voracious faces regarded him, and the excitement was electric in their eyes. Hell's menagerie was in attendance, and to his horror, he did what was natural. A fast-talking scoundrel relying on words, and he hoped they would not see through them. Somehow the words came. He stared, eyes agonizingly wide, unable to look away. Nick's eyes fell upon them, who had been the farmer, mind trying to put order to him. Empty eye sockets bled freely. Great big tears ran down like mascara. Mouth cruelly sliced up to pointed ears, a demonic jester's leer exposing jagged brown teeth in an eternal smile. The bulbous nude body was supported by stick legs, and seepage ran from pustules littering leathery skin. Clawed hands scourged at the tumors and wrought. Each promise of torment from mud made him draw even more blood, ecstasy clear on his face. Averting his gaze, Mud only found more perversity waiting. The two-plane woman became too remarkable. Snake eyes bulged like a fish and moved around independently of each other. One side of her jaw jutted with protruding needle teeth. Her sagging chest was exposed, the sight repulsive and oddly sexless. Listening to the threats of hell, her eyes began to jitter in their sockets. As Nick screamed torments, her hands went into the blood-splattered dress. Claws began to work. White worms began falling into a writhing pile. Turning away, his gorge rose, and the revulsion threatened to overtake him. If they saw, if they knew, he would know how much these people loved torture. And judging from the avid faces, it would be horrid to even imagine. Endless torments danced in the slightly glowing eyes of the congregation. Deputy Merriman stood at the crowd's front. Mud was surprised he hadn't seen him before. Now 3 feet taller, he stood utterly still, a knight of hell and a warden. Thickly muscled body exposed from the waist up, and skin flayed off roughly stitched back. Various scars decorated the battered body, a warrior's pride in combat. The babyish face was not just gone, but eviscerated. Blindfolded, Mud could still feel the uncompromising gaze underneath. Lipless, exposed teeth had a thin film of blood, and despite the heat, they began to chatter. The robe draped about his middle, thankfully, hid horrors below the waist. Nick saw things jerk under the fabric. The warden raised both hands like Nick. "Karn!" the hell congregation bellowed in response. Nick stood frozen on the spot, a smile carved into his face. They began to repeat the word in a chant, words garbled and wet. A large, thick wooden platter lifted upon their shoulders. Greedy claws dug into the wood. They set it in front of the Knight of Hell, an offering to their prophet. Reverently, they unveiled the contents. The agonized cry of swine bellowed up from a burnt creature, the shrieks high and piercing. Almost unrecognizable, clearly it still lived before being half-cooked. It flailed strongly, still tied. Nick could smell a scent oddly like cooked pork. However, the underlying low tang revolted him. They laughed down at the burnt creature's misery and gathered. Raising steel forks, absurdly long and deadly, he saw human eyes find him through the crowd, asking for salvation. Quickly, the congregation hid the offering. They began to stab and stab, the man's inarticulate pleas punctuating each thrust, but did not want to kill, but mutilate. The squeals of pain rose to an ear-splitting level, and mud covered his ears. Nick's nerve finally broke, turned away, and he saw a back door materialize. Salvation from eternal damnation, which he had always preached, always craved. It had reappeared, thankfully, and he flew out, cool air blasting his face. The world returned to its former blissful banality. Staring at the outhouse, he staggered forward, the world blurring. Once inside, he pulled down his pants. His guts let go, and he vomited a hot stream splattering the door. Nick's head grew light. Darkness followed, sweetly empty. Waking up after a moment, he felt sore, the violence of his sudden retch hurting his stomach. Sitting still, the wood felt surprisingly cool. Waiting, the world solidified, and he sat up, breathing deeply. "Hell is real," Nick said flatly to the crescent moon hole and the fetid smell of hot excrement. Standing, he cleaned himself before straightening his hair, shirt, pants, and even the laces on his shoes. Walking back to the church's rear door, he used a loose 2x4 to brace it. Strolling over to the deputy's cruiser, he got a pair of cuffs off the front seat. Mudd's car held a spare tank of gas, which he kept in case of an emergency. Returning to the church's thick oak door, he felt nothing, but a species of horror so deep it drove away thought. Taking out a clean white handkerchief, he stuffed it into the container of gas. Turning it briefly upside down, the rag quickly soaked through. Nick flicked a lighter, lit the cloth, and stared at the flames. Dark life lived in the flame. He knew that now. Throwing it through the doors, he used the cuffs to secure them. Walking away, he got back into his car, and for a few minutes he sat listening. The cicadas, chiggers, and grasshoppers had stopped their constant buzz. Watching the church burn, the sound of swine cut through the humid hot air. A chorus of pigs rose from the flames. He looked into the rearview mirror, starting the engine. Hell is real, words flat, which seeped from slack lips. He had finally received proof of an afterlife.